No, don't let me disturb you. There's a reason why people stopped talking when I came through. So anyway, we can continue the conversation. Hi, sorry I'm late. All right. Fridays, right? I don't know if you people have noticed the difference between Fridays. Maybe there's no difference between a Friday and a Monday for you, seeing as every day is the same, I suppose. Right. I just wanted to find out if people have any questions with regards to what we have looked at so far. Are you ready for the test, by the way? You better be ready for the test. I think you need to be ready for the test because we've covered the thing with most of the software engineering courses, and really this is an introduction. We're just glossing over basic software engineering concepts. It turns out that there's a lot more. But the thing with this course is that it's bulky, right? There's so many different things that are introduced. So if you're doing it for the first time, usually you probably need to do a bit of reading for you to understand what's going on. Are there any specific questions that people might have, concerns? Moses, what was your concern before I joined? Hello?
I make your answer. I didn't get your question.
What was your concern before I joined? I think you sounded like you had a concern.
Oh, it was over something that you mentioned yesterday over the concept that you wanted to skip, and we're just discussing with Elijah because we haven't covered that concept that you said you should skip.
I cut you short, I think, when I joined. I don't know if Moses went away, but anyway.
So did you get what I said? Sorry, Doc. I think there was a network error. I was saying with Elijah to say there's a concept that you said you wanted to skip because would have done it in ICT 3010, but it turns out that we haven't yet done it.
Yes, you have.
So when
entity relationship modeling. No, that's not true. No, I don't think it's true. You can't tell me that you haven't looked at entity relationship modeling. Is that true, or you're just trying to be funny here? You mean to tell me you haven't looked at entity relationship modeling yet? This. Have you not done this when you're implementing database? The way that you specify logically, right, using a logical design, keys, candidate keys, primary keys, the way that you represent them, the way that you represent the cardinalities, right, one to many, many to one, one to one. Have you not done that? You're just trying to be funny, I think. Yes, sir, so you've done that, right? This, yeah. Let me just
sorry, Doc. You haven't started sharing the screen.
All right. Yeah. So I'll be thankful for that. I'll be shocked if you told me that you haven't really looked at relationship modeling yet. You have looked at relationship modeling. I don't know what it was called. Maybe you were not paying attention in class. Yes, I think that's the reason. I think we figured out what the issue is here, or was. Have you not looked at these things? We'll pull out a perfect one, I guess, a better one. Let's see this. Have you not done this in 3010? What have you done? What have you done so far in 3010? What are you busy with right now in 3010?
Right now we are learning how to create a database in my QSL.
MySQL, MySQL. Yeah. So, yeah. But
yes.
Yeah, but MySQL, right? MySQL, MySQL. But the thing is, before you can create a database, you need to come up with a logical design, right? This thing here, and this thing here we're calling here is ER diagram here, is what is supposed to go. Where the hell is that thing? This is what's, oh my goodness. This is what's supposed to go in. What the hell? Oh my goodness, not this. I want the original template I'm using. Too many things open at the same time.
Oh, so
doesn't want to open this. This is what's supposed to go here, in here. What the hell is this thing doing here? Here, like the logical data models, right? So it's supposed to go in. It's one of those artifacts that you plug into 4.1, right? This is these days it's rarely the case that you develop an application that's not database driven, right? Your average application is database driven. You almost always process data, right? So the data needs to be stored somewhere, right? And it's always been traditional. Data has been stored in relational database management systems or database management systems. But increasingly, though, these days, people are moving away from relational database management systems, so they're using document stores or so-called NoSQL database management systems, right? So things like CouchDB, MongoDB, right? There are a lot of them. I'm sure you've discussed NoSQL databases with whoever is teaching you in 3010, right? A whole lot of them. But of course, just like relational database management system, there are some that are more popular than others, right? So I guess NoSQL databases ranking or something. If you have to look up some what do you call this, curated lists of and K-nuggets is probably the best place to go to. If you go to curated lists online, you find that there are certain databases that are more popular, right? And this is something that you need to carefully pay attention to, right? Why are you using MySQL, for instance, right? Well, you could use anything, right? It could be SQLite if you want to, but you notice here, I don't know if this is ranked, but MongoDB is top on the list. Cassandra, Redis, I've never used Redis myself. HBase, Neo4j. Now, some of these databases obviously are more appropriate if you're using a particular type of language, right? But yeah, so these are things to think about here, right? Why are you using MySQL? Did you ask why you're using MySQL and not MariaDB? Have you bothered to ask? What's the difference between MySQL and MariaDB?
Don't know.
Sorry?
I think there is no much difference. MySQL and MariaDB, they are just one and the same because these are the same guys who started MySQL are the one who divided to come up with the MySQL.
Well, if they're just the same, why do they have different names though? Anyways, one of them is a fork of the other, right? It's like the way you have LibreOffice, right? LibreOffice is a fork of OpenOffice. It's the way you have what do you call this? JDK, right? There's Oracle JDK. There's also Open JDK, right? I don't know if you looked at this when you're doing 2010, right? Anyways, licensing restrictions and things of that nature. Good stuff. You should be asking why can't you use myself when I'm teaching people databases? I like using SQLite or SQLite, right? You should be asking these questions. Why? You should ask him the next time you meet with your lecturer. Why are we using MySQL and not Access, or and not Oracle, or not? I think I already did SQLite, which is top on the list here. It's on top 10 list here. Why not PostgreSQL, right? Right? Why not this? Why not Microsoft SQL Server? Anyway, I don't know. So if there are no questions with regards to what we did when we met last, we're just going to continue this conversation. And let me just re-download the thing. Today's But as I'm re-downloading this, I hope what we've been looking at has been making sense so far, right? We are almost done with our journey implementation process, right? On some of the materials that have been uploaded onto the Moodle, so that it is made available. It's a lot easier for you guys. Then I suppose we continue where we left off, which was we had actually wrapped up on a walkthrough of the different components of the SRS document. What I want to, the thing I want to mention before we proceed to the next part here is that what you notice in the case example is that the requirements are organized by system features. But what you can do when you're getting started is you could just as well organize them based on the different users of the system, right? Remember that there's a part in the document where you look at user classes. I don't know if you remember this. So what you can do actually is you can reorganize these requirements that are going to be in section number 6 here based on different user classes. So if you identify users in your system as being lecturer, student, and administrator, for instance, you'd have separate sections for administrator, lecturer, and student. And then you include requirements specific to those different user classes, right? The idea of structuring this section that way is to make it a lot easier for you to bring out the different requirements. It's much easier for you to implement the requirements if they're organized in a logical way, right? So the IEEE standard here in the appendix section, it has, it told you that it has at least different ways of organizing these requirements, right? So you can choose to organize them by mode. You can choose to organize them by object. You can choose to organize them by feature, right? Which is what we're doing in the template. You can choose to organize them by stimuli, right? Input and output. You can choose to organize them by functional hierarchy. You can choose to organize them in so many different ways. And the part which outlines exactly how user classes, this would be, I strongly recommend either you go for the feature one or the user class one, right? If I were you, I'd do this, or the feature one, that's much easier. But there's a portion of the document that explains the different parts of the SRS document, and they outline to you the different features. We're gonna probably go to the part so that it's a lot more intuitive for you to find what you're looking for. Come on, where are you? It has to be after this. Right, so you should pay particular attention to section 3.3.7, right? Organizing specific requirements. You notice that they're saying you can organize them by system mode. You can organize them by user classes. I recommend user classes. You can organize them by objects. You can organize them. This should be a bit intuitive for you, right? Because you've done object-oriented analysis and design, hopefully in 2010. And so maybe organizing the requirements this way might make sense for you. It might be much more intuitive. You're going to organize them by feature, right? You look at the system functionality from the perspective of what the user expects. A feature is nothing more than a high-level description of some of the key functionalities associated with a piece of software, right? You can organize them by stimuli. You can organize them by reference, right? So take your pick. I encourage you to go with either the feature or the user class option. It's a lot easier to organize requirements that way. Okie doke. I don't know if I have the correct document. I hope I do. Okay. So something else I did is I snuck in a short section. The short idea was supposed to just quickly go through validation and change today, but I decided it was probably going to be important for us to talk about prioritization because I think it came up when we had our class yesterday or something. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. And this is especially important because you notice that in the SRS template itself, there's mention of the fact that you should indicate the priority associated with the feature that you're implementing. So the obvious question to ask then is, how exactly do you prioritize requirements, right? I thought it would be important for us to talk about this briefly. One thing to appreciate is that when you're tasked with a software development project, right? Somebody approaches you and tells you to say they want you to develop software for them. It's almost always the case that the software is going to be released in stages, right? So they're so-called releases, right? Version 1, version 1.2, version 2, version 3, up to the point in time when the client or the customer is satisfied with what you've done. Now, it turns out that it is not always possible, right? It's not always possible for you to implement all the system features in the initial release or in a single release, right? Because of timing constraints, because you might not have enough resources for you to work on the project. So maybe you'll have fewer developers required for you to implement the features in, let's say, 3 months, for instance. Yeah. And so with that being said, you need a way of prioritizing the requirements. You start with the most important requirements, right? So the obvious question is, how exactly do you get to prioritize? Well, it turns out that people have come up with a number of different techniques for doing this, right? I just want to look at just 3 that you should be able to find in literature, right? And then you should be enough to get you started in the SRS template itself. But one of the most widely used technique is the so-called Moscow technique, right? Where you get to classify the features or requirements based on the agency, right? And so typically phrases like the phrases must, should, could, and would are used, right? This is why it's called Moscow. Must, should, could. And so what you do is you identify your feature set, the list of features. Let's say you have 20 features, and then you go through a lengthy process of ascribing these different phrases to the different requirements, to the different features. So is a login feature a must, or is it a should, or is it a could, or is it a would? Is it a nice to have? Nice to have requirements are things that won't prevent users from conducting or performing their day-to-day duties once using the piece of software. It's just it's a nice to have feature, right? A mandatory feature is something that a user or the system needs to exhibit for a user to be able to accomplish their goal, right? And then should is just features that are of high priority, obviously. Could would be features that are preferred, but are not exactly necessary, right? So you can think of this from a perspective of, let's say, authentication and authorization, for instance. You know that you can implement authentication and authorization in different ways these days. When you're logging in, you can log in using a third-party service like Facebook, like Google, or you can do it the traditional way where somebody registers for an account and then they'll type in their username and password. Perhaps third-party integration or single sign-on might not necessarily be a mandatory thing, right? So you tag that as maybe a could or a would. It's desired but not necessary because people would still be able to use a piece of software, right? So the key thing here is as you come up with a list of feature sets, you ascribe these phrases to the feature set, right? Another technique that's used is just a simple ranking technique where you enumerate the features, right? So you come up with numbers, let's say 1 to 10, and then the most important features will be ascribed the lowest number. So if you're one of those people who's implementing the I don't know. I like using the example of the makeup requester here because I'm really looking forward to that. I can relate to that problem, right? It's a very painful problem. The feature that's going to enable a user to request for a makeup, I don't know if it's filling in a form and sending that request, that will be given the highest priority, right? So you ascribe the number 1 to it, right? Generating an email once a user requests a makeup, it's not really high priority, but it's a nice to have feature. So maybe you give it a priority value of 3 or 4 or something, right? It wouldn't necessarily stop the user from requesting the makeup using the application if an email is not automatically generated, for instance. Right? Another technique that's commonly used is the so-called kernel analysis, where the focus is more from perspective of stakeholders or the customer, right? So you view the requirements from the perspective of the customer, and you typically assign these phrases, basic, performance, and excitement to the different features, right? So the basic factors or basic features are the features that which when left out will prevent the users from using the system. The performance features or factors would be the features that will draw the users to using the system because they can see the real value of the system. And then the excitement features is the wow factors, right? So the things that will get the customers excited enough to want to use the system, right? And there's a couple of other techniques that I used. Something that we will look at once we look at agile techniques is the so-called storyboards, right? That's a technique that's used in agile development. So we'll pause for that and have a discussion about it once we look at agile techniques. But for now, I mean, this is just techniques that you can use. Something that will probably come in, that is going to be more intuitive for you is just use a simple ranking technique. And you can get sophisticated really when it comes to simple ranking, right? You can go with a so-called pairwise comparison, right? So let's say you have 20 features. You draw up your pairwise comparison matrix, and then you start comparing the features against each other so that you identify the highest priority features. Yeah? The people doing maths, have you looked at pairwise comparison matrix, right? Right, so you're comparing, typically your columns will have all the features, and then the adjacent thing will have something similar to this, right? All the features will be listed on top, all the features will be listed here adjacently, and then you start comparing them against each other. Yeah, but the Moscow technique should be fine. I guess maybe we can force you to use the Moscow technique. So maybe the assignment to do with the SRS document will require that as you're prioritizing your requirements, as you come up with the list of features associated with the systems you're developing as part of the respective projects, we shall ask that you use the Moscow technique for you to prioritize the requirements, right? And we know that this is important because at some stage you have to specify in the SRS document like so. Here, you must specify the priority associated with each of the features. Right? Each of the features. Good stuff. Okay, we can quickly, I was hoping we could quickly do this stuff, validation and the requirements change, wrap up, and then have a discussion, the informal discussion I spoke about. Maybe we can defer the informal discussion to next week. So just take note, we are going to have that informal conversation next week. So I hope you let your colleagues know, those are not, that are not around, so that make progress. So we'll look at requirements validation, right? Because it turns out that once you identify the requirements associated with your system, what you want to do is to validate them, right? The question is how exactly do you go about validating the requirements? So what you're doing when you're validating and checking the requirements is you want to ascertain that the list of requirements that you've collected, that you've elicited, are in actual fact a representation of what your client or your customer is expecting. And this is important because customers rarely know what they want. In fact, it's almost always the case that they don't know what they want. They might think that they know what, who is this now? Sorry about that. They might think that they know what they want, but in actual fact, they don't know what they want, right? And in fact, this always happens. They will come back to you and tell you, no, but this is not how we wanted, this is not what we meant when we requested that the system should have this particular feature, right? So you need a way of validating and checking so that you're doing the right thing, so that you cut down on the amount of time that you're going to spend implementing or re-implementing certain features. Because it turns out that requirements errors result in really high costs, right? So which is why you need to make sure that you validate this. So if you don't get this right the first time, what that means is your programmers will spend additional time re-implementing features that have already been implemented. When you have developers spending additional time on what has already been done, that translates to money. They need to be paid, right? People don't do things for free. You have to pay them. So rather than have them spend a lot of time on a single requirement, you want to make sure that you get it right when you elicit the requirements. So you validate the requirements. And so the idea is to ensure that you fix all problematic requirements, right? So that you avoid on potential costs that you might incur if you don't do that. Right, so some obvious questions that you tend to ask when you're validating and checking requirements is, so in terms of validity is, you want to confirm that the system exhibits, or the requirements are actually representative of the different functions that the customer is expecting, right? So does the system provide the functionalities which best support the customer needs? You also look at consistency, right? Do you have certain requirements that conflict with each other, right? In which case you just merge them in one. Yeah? You want to make sure that your requirements are complete. Ensure that all of the functionalities, key functionalities of the piece of software you're developing are included in the requirements. You want to be realistic, right? People that don't understand how software works will expect you to do all sorts of funny things. I want you to be able to interact with the system by just touching the screen of my smartphone or some weird thing like that, right? So you want to make sure that the requirements are realistic enough. These are things that you are going to be able to do, right? And in certain instances, it might be feasible to actually implement those features, but it might mean that you need additional money because you need to subcontract expertise. You might need specialist technologies, for instance, right? So you want to be very careful that the requirements are realistic enough within the scope of what you're able to do as a software development company. And this goes to what you're doing in your respective projects, right? It can be tempting at this stage, especially when you're doing this for the first time, to get so excited that you want to do all sorts of fancy things. Just go with the basics, right? Go with things that you know are going to be realistic. You will also want to ensure that you're able to verify the requirements, right? So at the list of, is there a way in which you can cross-check the list of requirements, right? And this is important during validation and testing, obviously. So you want to make sure that that is possible. So there are a number of techniques that can be used to validate and check requirements, obviously. Obvious one is just requirements review, right? Where you just manually analyze the list of requirements in your SRS document, in this case. Another approach that you can take, it's I guess a bit involving, so included chapter 2 here because you find it in Ian Somerville's chapter 2 here, by the way, prototyping. Another approach you can do is you validate the requirements by developing a prototype application, right? Something that you can easily expose to the user. And so as you're verifying the requirements, the user has a reference point, right? So it's not something that's more theoretical where you have to explain to the user exactly how a system is supposed to behave, but rather you have them interact with a prototype version of what you're developing, right? And this is desirable, but it's also involving, right? It's time consuming. You'd have to be very careful on whether you'd want to take this approach here. It works well, I guess, if you decide to take an agile approach where you could probably just come up with a very, very rough throwaway prototype, right? Maybe something that is just, it's unexecutable quite right, but the only thing it has is just some fancy interface or something to best explain the different features of the software. You can also generate test cases. We will look at this, right? Once we look at unit testing, for instance, how we get to generate test cases here. So you develop test cases and then you expose these test cases to the application to just confirm that the requirements are valid. Right, so you want to make sure that that you regularly review the requirements, right, as you're defining them, and more importantly, that your customers and yourselves sit together and agree on these things. It's important that you agree. In fact, you must be able to sign off, right? A formal document must be available where everybody signs off. Don't fall into the trap of saying, no, there was a gentleman's agreement to say we agreed that this was fine. No. Whip out a document, right? Get a document and have everybody else sign. They should sign, physically sign the document. Wow, I thought I had a... They should sign the document that will be checklist. Usually there are templates that people throw around here. I thought I had a template somewhere, a really nice template, but I guess not. I thought there was a checklist that we could use, showcase. Just give me a second, I have to show you this, right? Wow, it's not there, right? It's quite unfortunate, I guess. Anyway, I suppose. Wow. Okay, that's fine. And when I find it, I'll share it with you, right? So it's important. I've learned the hard way myself that you always want things to be formal, right? And I know some people don't take kindly to that, which is why myself, I refuse to interact with people, and this has nothing to do with software engineering, but it's to do with being formal, right? I refuse to, when it's something serious we need to discuss, I'll tell people, send email. Why? You have a reference point on what was agreed, right? No, I called him and I told him this. Well, but where is the proof that you did that, right? But anyways, the reviews should be formal, right? Where you endorse signatures or something, and to be done early on in the stage. Right, so in terms of the review process, I mean, some of the things to look forward to here: verifiability, comprehensiveness of the requirements, whether the requirements are traceable or adaptable. These are some of the things that you look forward to when reviewing the requirements, right? So you verify that the requirements are obviously going to be testable, if they're realistic, they're comprehensive enough, and if you can trace the origin of the requirements, right? More importantly, you always want to make sure that a change to the requirements doesn't result into a corresponding larger change in the other requirements, right? So there's a book by Weiga and Beatty, which has it's an alternative view to what you get to look out for as you're validating or reviewing requirements. I do encourage you to look at this. This is one of the reasons why I included the list of these questions in here, really. We don't have to walk through these, but these are pretty much intuitive, right? So some of the questions that you tend to ask in this checklist. This is a different type of checklist, more detailed, right? I encourage you to take a look at this at your own time, right? Review checklist. So there's a checklist for the functional requirements and a checklist for the EDTs, remember the non-functional requirements. You notice that while these are specific to the functional requirements, the quality attributes are more specific to the non-functional requirements, right? So remember the things to do with internalization and localization, usability, ease of use, you know, all of these things, things that are in that SRS document template, right? You can look at this at your own time. We don't have to read through these questions, but these are some, and the thing with this checklist is that you don't, the idea behind this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there are people that have already come up with a potential checklist that you can use, right? Something like this. Why not just adapt this to whatever you're doing? Rather, if you're a bit off, does it apply to the piece of system that you're implementing, you leave it out, right? So it's the idea behind this checklist here. I encourage you to go through this checklist at your own time, right? Look at the type of questions that you tend to ask when you're focusing on the correctness aspect, right? If you are concerned with standards and traceability, these are the sort of questions that you ask here. I think we should upload this as well. I'll upload the checklist on the Moodle as well. Is this making sense? No answer. Okay. Yeah. So quality attributes, organization and traceability. Any additional issues, right? Some of these things might not really be applicable to the toll projects that you're working on, right? But the important things to take into account nonetheless. Is that fine with regards to validation? So sort of things that you take into account as you're validating and reviewing your requirements, right? You would have to do this. Now, granted, in the projects that we're working towards, you probably won't really go through a very thorough requirements review and validation process. We will need to validate the requirements, obviously, but it'll be just it'll be just vague, right? A bit rough, not detailed. Because of timing constraints, we want to rush to the other parts of the project, some of the other things that we need to do. Any thoughts about what we just spoke about? Validation, review of requirements.
I have a question, but it's on the prioritization.
Yes, please.
On the Moscow technique, is it a must that will always have things that fall into each category?
No, actually, that's the thing with the prioritizing requirements is that it turns out that if you decide to use a different technique, not the Moscow or a different kind of ranking technique where instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you decide to say you're going to have high priority, medium priority, low priority, right? It's possible that you'll be faced with a situation where all the requirements are high priority requirements, or at least most of them. So the answer is no. It's not a must that you should have requirements that will fall under this. It's possible that maybe the only parts that are going to be applicable for whatever it is you're doing, but in a real life scenario, actually, it's possible that you'd have these, right? All of them available. But it's possible that maybe you have mandatory ones and maybe preferred requirements, right? So it's not a must. Thanks for that question. It's not a must. And when you're using a simple ranking technique where you're saying you're going to ascribe 1 to the more important requirements, it might just turn out that maybe you have 5 of them that are 1s, you know, the others are 2s, right? So I don't know, or maybe this would be strange though. Maybe all of your requirements will have a priority of 1, in which case you have to do all of them. No, not always the case. Great question, thanks a lot. These are good questions we're asking. All right. So we're just going to again just try and
I have another question as well.
Yes, please.
So when you're trying to organize your features,
Yes.
in the event that you find yourself in a situation where something that a stakeholder requested, like a client requested, isn't feasible, right? Like, is it that you must include that? Like, do you prioritize it into putting it into the software, or you just, or how do you determine if it's something that has to be put in, or something that you can just say that it's not possible, and or like within what you want to achieve?
Great question again. So the way you handle that is you see, when you're eliciting the requirements, when you're prioritizing the requirements, when you're verifying and validating the requirements, when you're reviewing them, we mentioned at some stage that this has to be a formal process, and it has to be done together with the customers. You, being the expert, should be able to tell these people that this is something that is not possible. If you cannot do it, you tell them upfront, this is not possible, you cannot do this. You explain why you're unable to do that, right? If it's something that you think is possible but is going to result in additional costs, you explain to them to say, listen, our development firm is a pretty small firm. The developers that we currently have will not be able to implement this particular feature of the system. But what we can do is we can subcontract a third party to help us implement this feature. But what that means is that you need to pay extra money, right? So the idea here is if it's something that do not get roped up into doing something or agreeing to do something that you know is going to be hard or impossible to achieve, because they're going to hold you to account, right? Remember, this is a formal process. The document, once you come up with this document, it's a basis for a contract, right? It's going to be a reference point, essentially, right? At some stage, you're going to revisit. Sorry.
In terms of what at our level, or in the project that we're doing,
yeah.
When we are listing these features, do we limit what we can do to our current scope, or are you expecting that if a person has something that is possible, we should try and branch out of what we've already learned?
Right, that's an interesting question here. And for this course, what I'm interested in is you guys being able to defend the sort of decisions you're going to make, right? So if you decide as a group to say, there's this fancy feature, maybe the automatic generation of emails, for instance, or maybe once you interact with me in your group, right? I would tell you to say what I expect is that when a student, because I know students like WhatsApp, when a student requests for a makeup, you must automatically send them a WhatsApp message. If you think that that's hard for you, as in if you think that that's going to take up a lot of your time, you give it a raw priority, or you should be able to justify to say we left this feature out because of certain limitations, right? So it's not like you'll be penalized per se, but what we expect is for you to be able to justify some of these decisions you're making as a group. And that's the idea behind what we're doing here, right? That's what we're learning fundamentally here, by the way. So there's less focus in this course. Again, I just want this to sink in. There's going to be less focus on the implementation part. We have to do the implementation because we're learning how to develop software in a formal and systematic manner, right? But it's not our interest is not on the development part, right? Which is why, I mean, sure, I'm concerned that maybe we haven't really looked at certain things that we thought you'd have looked at by now in 3010, maybe because the topics have been swapped around here, but that's fine. Again, maybe we can make do with the little knowledge that you have. And the idea, by the way, is that by the time we get to next year, which is very soon, when you start working on those capstone projects, the vast majority of you will work on software engineering projects. You want to be able to work on something that is more involved than what you're doing right now, because you'd have gotten to a stage where you understand exactly what you need to do, the formal process. And so the focus is going to be developing the skills into some of these fancy frameworks, for instance, fancy development environments. So no, again, you won't be penalized or held to account if you're unable to implement a feature. We're not really looking at implementation per se. It's a software engineering. What am I doing? It's a software engineering process we're concerned about. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So requirements change, right? Just to remind you, right, that this idea of change, came up when we started looking at the SDLC, right, the software development lifecycle. We highlighted the fact that this is a continuous process. You go in a loop, right? Things are constantly changing. Now, in fact, if you're a sort of company that develops software for a living and you develop good software, it's likely the case that when you develop software for a particular company, somewhere down the line, they'll come back to you. Maybe they'll come back to you because they need an upgrade. They'll come back to you because they need an additional feature, right? What we're trying to say here is that requirements will change. In circumstances when requirements change, vary, they're different. It could be the case that the client or customers have purchased a completely new server, right? Years down the line, maybe 3-4 years after you develop a piece of software. And that piece of hardware, the new computer, the new server computer system is not compatible with the software that you developed or something. In which case, notice that there'll be a change in requirements, right? So what we're saying is both business and technical, both business requirements, the business might change, the technical environment might change. The business requirements or the business might change because organizations evolve, right? They grow. UNZA today is not what it was 10 years ago. Which is why the system that was used 10 years ago is completely different from the system that's being used right now, right? This SIS system that you're using right now is going to change. It's going to evolve 5 years from now because the business changes, it evolves. The technical requirements changes. Software components, newer variations or versions of software components come onto the scene. When they're integrated into the environment, the piece of software you have developed has to be modified so that it fits into the new versions of software components, right? Right, so more importantly though, the initial customers that you have interacted with might be different 5 years from now, right? And so their requirements will ultimately change. They'll be different from the set of key requirements that that you elicited from the initial set of users that you had interacted with when you were collecting the requirements, right? So key thing here is that requirements will change, and they change due to a variety of reasons, right? Business requirements will evolve, the technical environment will change, so hardware and software interfaces and components will change. This so-called Moodle API that you're interacting with, those of you that are interacting with Moodle, it will change maybe 10 years from now, right? In which case, obviously, the requirements of the system will have to change as well. Right, so typically these large-scale software systems will have a broad spectrum of users that will have different sort of requirements and priorities, and so it's one of the reasons why requirements obviously change, right? Again, just to put things into perspective here in terms of what typically happens as your requirements are changing or evolving, you have your initial. You have the problem that you're addressing, you collect your initial set of requirements based on the evolution of the business, right? You modify those requirements because maybe you better understand the problem, because somewhere down the line, new set of requirements come into play, and then you come up with change requirements, right? So it's a loop. And this explains why we have that cycle in the SDL, the software development life cycle, where the last phase is evolution, right? You're feeding back into the requirements. Remember, requirements engineering, design, implementation, testing, evolution, right? The evolution takes place because the initial problem space has changed, it's evolved, right? The initial set of requirements has been incorporated into the end process. So obviously, I mean, these requirements need to be managed in a certain way, right? So requirements management is nothing more than an end-to-end process that you go through to manage the changing requirements as the new requirements are being incorporated into the system. So best approach here is to make sure that you keep track of the requirements and how they are related to each other, right? So the older requirements have to be linked to the newer requirements so that you're able to explicitly state how a new requirement relates to an order requirement or an order variation of the requirement. Versioning, essentially. So there are a couple of decisions that will obviously need to be made here. Things like requirements should be able to be uniquely identified, right? And the reason why you want to be able to uniquely identify requirements is you need to cross-reference the requirements. So if you are working with SRS document version 3, you want to be able to link to a particular requirement that is in version 1.0, for instance. And how do you do that? You do that by making reference to a unique identifier associated with the requirement, right? Trying to figure out what I was trying to put across when we brought in the aspect of change management here. More obviously, I mean, as you're managing these requirements, you need to do some sort of impact analysis to determine exactly how much money, right? How much is going to cost for you to change the requirements. And obviously you need to put in place traceability policies as well that would be able to, because remember we're saying you need a way to be able to reference requirements that might exist in other versions of, let's say, an SRS document, right? So there needs to be a traceability policy in place that you use to define the relationships that exist between the different requirements. So there's usually tools that are used for doing this, project management tools. So I do believe once we look at agile techniques, when we look at Jira, for instance, or Jira, depending on how you want to pronounce this, I do believe that it has support for this. So a way of versioning these requirements. So if you have different versions of an SRS document, the question is, how exactly do you keep track of the different versions, right? There are tools, right? Sometimes you could use something that's as basic as a database management system to actually keep track of the requirements or changing requirements. Or, as you will discover very, very soon once we look at software configuration management, you can actually version control these documents, right? So you create a very simple repository, right? And that repository would typically have, as you are creating new versions of the SR documents, you version control them so that you keep track of what sort of changes were made, right? This is probably what I would gravitate more towards myself, I guess because it's a preference really. I've gotten to a stage where I version control literally everything, you know. So my key takeaway point here is there are various tools that you can use to keep track of these changing requirements. Easiest one being a way to systematically version the documents, the SRS documents that you have. So the initial version of the SRS document is going to be .not. So, sorry about that. I hope you can hear me. Right. So I was talking about versioning, right? So you can version control a document. You'll soon see that version controlling a document is probably going to be a lot easier, actually. So still on decisions here, there's a process that you go through for you to decide whether a requirement should be changed or not, right? So you obviously need to do some sort of problem analysis first, where you check if a particular requirement is valid, obviously, and then you do a change analysis and you take into account potential costs associated with that change. And then you implement the change, right? If you decide to make that change, if you're comfortable with the change analysis output here. So problem analysis, right? Process of deciding if a requirement is going to change. You analyze the problem, you do a change analysis, right? Most important thing you take into account is potential costs associated with the change. If you're comfortable with the output, you implement the change, right? And then boom, you're done. Right? Visual representation of what you typically do here, right? From problem analysis all the way up to change implementation. All right. I was rushing here. I want us to start system design. I think we don't have a bit of time here, but just to kind of recap on some of the things that we've done here, right? This is a summary of the things that we've looked at here in terms of requirements, right? I think it's from elicitation down to specification here. And sometimes people refer to specification as analysis, really it's one and the same thing. But we made mention of the fact that requirements have to do with the capabilities and the constraints associated with a piece of software, right? And then we briefly looked at functional requirements and non-functional requirements, right? Those EDTs would be the non-functional requirements, right? The quality attributes and performance issues. The functional requirements will normally be mapped onto the actual capabilities of the software, what the software is going to be doing. And we also emphasize the fact that as with most stages in the software development lifecycle, really, requirements engineering is an iterative process, right? You go into a loop where you elicit the requirements, you will come up with specification of the requirements, and then you verify, you validate the requirements to make sure that they are correct, that they are comprehensive, right? But also, more importantly, the individual processes here, like the elicitation process, is also an iterative process, right? Where you go through a process where you discover the requirements, you elicit the requirements, you classify them. I don't know if you still remember this, right? You meet with the stakeholders so that you negotiate the requirements, and then you document them, right? We highlighted, or we narrowed down on a broad spectrum of elicitation techniques. Granted, those are not comprehensive. Some of them we will discuss, especially prototyping, actually rapid application prototyping, during our discussion of agile techniques. But we looked at some more traditional, we focused on the more traditional techniques, right? Interviews, questionnaires, focus group discussions, workshops, right? These are the more traditional techniques. It turns out that there's more, right? So when you look at agile techniques, you discover that we have scenarios and user stories, right? So we'll look at how we go about implementing so-called storyboarding, right? Which is somewhat become popular these days, right? And then we discussed that the specification part is more the formalizing of the requirements. So you translate the elicited requirements into a more formal notation, a notation that is going to be referenced by your customers, different roles from the customer end, and also the people that are part of the project management team associated with the software development company. It turns out that the information that they would want to get from the requirement specification document, software requirement specification document, is different, right? So the customer would be more interested in the high-level aspects of the software requirements document. The development firm in this case, right, the developers and I guess the managers or something for that software development firm would be more interested in the system requirements, more details of the interactions that take place between the user and the system, for instance. And we emphasize that this is actually a formal contract, right? This software requirement specification document is a formal contract between your customers and yourself as a software development firm. This is going to be a basis for everything. Verifying, oh no, we're going to pay you a down payment of X amount. Once you are done with the project, we pay you the remainder. You only get paid the remainder once you go through this formal contract, right, to verify that everything that is in that formal contract was actually implemented. And then we looked at the so-called requirements validation process, review process, specific aspects that we take into account when validating and reviewing the requirements, right? I thought that was a pretty decent introduction to the process that we go through insofar as requirements engineering is concerned. right? Setting the stage for inching closer to the actual implementation, the translation of these requirements into source code, actual software, right? I don't know if people have any comments or concerns about about this lecture series. Just to mention that some of these things will manifest themselves back once we look at agile techniques specifically, because we tend to talk about the same things, but it's just that they're done in a rather different way, right? Any thoughts or comments about this? Yes, sir.
So, yeah, as in, I just wanted to find out concerning the test. Like, are we going to like have any diagrams or something? Because I did a small test. Like, I don't know, I can explain it, but you find that there's a diagram this side, and you have to navigate to the next page to go and answer the question. You go back again, you check on the diagram, something like that. It's a bit time consuming and stuff.
Well, but
So
you
I
have
just
to be
wanted-
smart about this, right? At this stage, at third year, I guess. And the question, the answer is yes. There'll probably be diagrams in there. There'll be all sorts of things in the test, actually. And by the way, we've gotten to a stage where everything we've covered up to now, we are done with this lecture series, is coming in the test. Up to now, right? So there will be diagrams, plenty of diagrams, actually, right? But you know, there are techniques you can use, Victor, right? You can open multiple tabs. And this issue came up, right? There's this strange test that we had, a course that I was involved with, right? No navigating from one page to the next. And I'm like, there are breadcrumbs. All you have to do is just click. You navigate from one question to the other, right? How hard can that be? Yeah? How hard can that be for you to navigate from one page to the next? Is it difficult for you to click, point and click, Victor? You find it difficult to point and click, yeah? With your mouse.
Like sometimes people don't use laptops or something; they use phones. So sometimes it's a
Yeah,
bit
it's point and click still. You use your thumb, right? So let me see if there's an example here. I think there's one of the questions that we had where people complained, no, going next, it was difficult. I'm like, wow, really? So give you an example. Let me just kind of preview this and see if, let's just preview this so that I showcase what I mean here, right? So we had this assessment, yeah? And I'm just gonna start the attempt here. You notice, right? If you have this, you see these breadcrumbs here. It's not that hard for you to answer this question and just go to question number 4 if you want. You go there. If you want to revisit question number 1, you go there. It's not that hard. If you want, you can open multiple tabs for these different questions so that you don't have to navigate. You can do this on your phone. I do this on my phone. I open multiple tabs on my phone. And then you have the tabs for question 1, question 3, question 2. Easy stuff, right? Let me tell you something about these tabs, right? I mean, sorry, these pages. These are for you. Every time you answer a question and you go to the next page, the answer is saved for you. Next page is saved for you. If everything is going to be dumped on one page and your power goes off, it's likely that that stuff is not going to be saved. What happens? You have to start from scratch. So that is for your own good, by the way. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
But also, what we've done in the course of these last couple of weeks, we've done a couple of assessments in other courses, tests and quizzes, and we've learned from past mistakes. Right? So what we do, like time takes into account the fact that some people won't really have fast connectivity, and so what we do actually, what we will do in the test is, you notice that there'll be additional time allocated. And in fact, you have a grace period on top of the additional time. The grace period will enable you to submit the question. You won't be able to make changes, but you'll be able to submit the question in the event that you have connectivity issues, for instance, yeah? Is this making sense? This is good. The test is coming. You better prepare. We've covered quite a lot of reading involved, right? One of the things I never quite liked about software engineering when I did it myself many years ago, I did 2 different courses. I did, it was an introduction to software engineering course, and then there was an advanced software engineering as well. And it wasn't as exciting as these other courses, right? it was only, I guess, when I left UNZA that I realized the importance of this process. Anybody can hack together software and tell you to say, this is the software I've developed. But very few people have the skill set to systematically develop software. This is what we're doing. This is what sets us apart from the people on the streets that just picked up a web development book, and I'm not looking down on them. You pick up a web development book and you say, I know how to develop software. You know how to program, you don't know how to develop software. There's a difference between a programmer and a software developer, right? In this course, we are teaching you to become, how to become a good software developer or something to a certain extent. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll see you when you see me. Just a reminder that the next interaction is going to be informal one. I don't know if it's Monday or something. Informal interaction where we get to, where are you? Where we get to, you're here. Where you is on Monday at 18 hours, where we will, we want to make sure that the illustration methods that you want to use and the stakeholders that you identified are things that make sense, right? So that we're doing the correct thing. So that the things that are going to be scribed into the SRH document are the correct things. Okay, thanks a lot. See you when you see me. Stay safe and bye-bye. Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, sir.
It's also about the test.
Mm-hmm.
Will the questions be timed? Let's say if you want to answer question 1, then if you don't know it, then if you have to go to question 2, can you still go back to question 1 even though you opened it?
Yes, you can. It will be. It will be like that. That's the way a test is. So if you notice what the example I was giving here, I'm on question number 3 here. I'll skip through because this is a hard question, right? It's on requirement. It's on requirements elicitation, and I need to think. So I'll skip it. I'll go to question 5. You answer question 5. Towards the end, when you're remaining with 1 minute, you go to question 3, right? So yes, you will have the opportunity to revisit the questions. But once your time is up, you will not have access to the questions, right? You only have access to questions once the assessment closes.
All right. All right.
Yeah, this thing will be ticking though, the timer, right? If I were you, I would. What we do in most of the courses we're involved with is that we open up the assessment. It's open within a 24-hour window period to give you the opportunity to identify which slot is the best for wherever it is you're at. So if you're on the copper belt like Elijah, yeah, and there's load shedding where you're staying between 9 and 18, do not write the test between 9 and 18. Instead, start writing the test at midnight. All right, you must plan. So we do this so that you're able to plan ahead. Something else that you want to seriously ensure that you take into account is this issue of bundles. Make sure you have sufficient bundles. I'm probably going to come out as being a person who's difficult, but I will refuse anyone who comes back to us to say, I was unable to finish the test because I had no bundles. Are you serious? You should have prepared beforehand. No, my phone had little battery power. We have people doing that, right? Well, why didn't you charge your phone? Charge it, right? You know there's a test on September 11th. Charge it on September 10th. And don't go on YouTube and on Facebook using up your battery power, right? Guys, I don't know if there are any questions. I see the popular questions that to do with the test. Any other concerns with the test though? Here's the other thing. What if you want an option, because this is essay type, it's going to be, it will have essay type questions, a bit of explanation. What we've done in past assessments in these other courses is we give you an option to upload scanned solutions. So if you have a phone and you would much rather pick a plain paper and write your solution, we will do that, right? We will do that so that all you have to do is you will scan your solutions, make sure that they're legible enough though, convert them to PDF, and then upload them as your solution. I mean, you observe, let me just show you something here, right? We kind of did this, I guess, I don't know. In the test, I think, in the, I guess, first years or something. If we go down here, right, the test 1, what we had for these guys, we had the option, right? we told them you are allowed to submit scanned documents in PDF format of your solutions. If you don't want to use, if you have a small phone, like Victor is saying, no, not everyone has computers. We know this, right? Pick up a plain piece of paper, a pen, write down your solution. Once you're done, scan the solutions, upload them. Observe, if I preview this quiz, or this test rather, and start this attempt, you will notice that each one of these things had the option where you could upload a PDF document of your solution. Or alternatively, you could type your solution. Right? If you want to type, I prefer to type myself. I don't know about you. We're different, I don't know. I'm much faster typing than writing, right? I'll probably take probably twice as long if I was writing than typing. Is this fine?
Another question, sir.
Please.
Are we to expect things in the supplementary materials to also appear in the test?
Not quite. I mean, some things like some reading materials that you were taught to look at probably have information that is going to come in the test because they're meant to complement, but you'll not be tested on something that we didn't discuss actually. So here's the thing, to answer your question, you should never be examined on something that you haven't been taught, right? So the things that are in the supplementary materials, unless if they were discussed in the lecture series, in one of the lecture series, then yes, there will be a part of that, but otherwise, no.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to upload the elicitation assignment. I will, I think. Another reminder, I keep saying this, the session on Monday is going to be an informal session. I want it to be back and forth, so make sure that each group is ready to give us an informal overview of what sort of things they're going to be doing in terms of elicitation and whatnot. Right? It's not going to be examined. You're not getting marks for this, but it's meant to be an opportunity to course correct, to make sure that you're doing the correct things. Thanks a lot, people. Take care, stay safe, and this thing is serious. The exam is coming in November, right? Thank you. Bye-bye.